if you look at the game of venture capital, it's a brand game. Go to the Valley. Those are all brands, right? Oh, you got money from Andreessen. Oh, you got money from, you know, Coslow. Like, okay, then you must be something.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be your host of the VC 10X podcast. And today we have Jay Kolbe with us. Jay is a co founder and senior managing partner at Impact Partners, a PR firm working with top names in VC, family offices, and high net worth individuals. In this episode, we talk about what is PR, importance of PR for VCs, common misconceptions about PR, crisis management in PR, focus on impactful coverage over maximizing reach, using exclusivity to get clients featured in top publications, role of PR in fundraising announcement, was the future of PR, and so much more. So, without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. Hey, Jazz, so good to have you on the VC 10X podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Prashant. Really excited to do this and share a little bit more about the intersection of venture capital and public relations.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to have you on here and discuss about all things PR because a lot of the hype that we see in VC or in even the startup world is actually manufactured by the PR world or, arranged by them. So would love to get insights into that from you because you're running Impact Partner. So to start things, can you briefly give us an introduction on what Impact Partner does and
Yeah.
what is PR, if you could briefly rip on that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I could break PR and strategic communications and media relations and, almost now content and social marketing all kind of like hovering in one big bucket together that really, impacts this. But, what we like to say at Impact Partners is that we're a strategic communications firm that focuses on families, funds, and founders. And if you peel that back a little bit, families are the family offices. Funds are, venture debt, venture equity, private credit, and then the founders are really startups. And so a lot of that's really an emerging tech, which can be everything from ad tech to blockchain, crypto, and fintech, and everything in between. And so that's kind of we found that having kind of that trinity really it lines up with the capital stack. You got the family offices fund the ventures, and the ventures fund the startups. And so when you're able to kind of communicate, having kind of that 360 perspective, it really gives you a little bit of an extra advantage over other people who don't maybe see the full spectrum of what's touching, just really what fuels business and startups. The one thing I will say about us that stands out, we started the firm about 5 years ago. One of the reasons we wanted to do that is because we wanted to, I think, get back to the core tenets of the relationship side of public relations, because, kind of with the advent of technology, things have become a little more transactional, a little bit more marketing and content heavy, and less really about building the relationships that get you into places you can't pay to be into, to get the validation from third parties that are elite validators. And that's what really makes PR great. And I think we've drifted from that as a profession in the digital age. And we wanted to get back to those relationships and get really back to the strategic communications part of this and saying, hey, we have access to the press, but we want to make sure that when we interact with them, that we're telling them things that they've never heard before, that are high value, they're differentiating, things of that nature. And so we built the firm to be relationship forward. And then we also built it to, have a 720 perspective where we've got individuals who are left and right brained. If you're communicating, half of your audience is, if you're left brain, half your audience might be right brain. If you're not thinking about them, then you're not checking the boxes on your communications. And so I think that's some of the core stuff that stands out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty amazing. And I'd be interested to learn because I believe that you're managing some of the biggest names in VC and family offices, big names in your clients. So we'd love to learn what's your process for, managing these clients, because I think, even managing PR is a critical thing for them. You have to be sure what needs to be said and where it needs to be said. So we'd love to know what's the management process and what if you have a system for managing clients, what does that look like?
Yeah. And I think, we like to say, meet people where they're at, and that process is different. So, if you look at a family office that we work with, Um, we should come back to why family offices are actually looking at PR, because that's a whole nother podcast into and of itself. A family office has more structure around it, so there might be more layers, and so your process for working with them, um, it might actually have more kind of like block and tackle, like meetings and coordination and capturing what's going on, which gets funneled up into a broader audience. Um, when you're working with a venture capital firm, at least in our case, we work with most of the principals and founders. So if you're working directly with them, it's not so much about the reporting; it's more about being really strategic in your interactions with them and understanding where they're at, what they need to accomplish, and how you're going to help them do that. And that's more direct. So there's less of a process of reporting and going around and kind of saying, hey, let's just make sure everything that we do is captured in some form because it's got to get reported to someone. They know what's going on because they're talking to you every day. So that's a little different structure there. And then you're working with startups. That's also a little different because first of all, there's usually someone running marketing and communications. They're going a mile a minute and might be doing it for the first time, and so that's a little bit different. So you have to kind of write down more, you have to track more. But generally how we work is that we do weekly touch base calls, and we push our people to produce thought leadership content to tell us, react to what's going on in the world. It's a little bit, if you're not constantly asking clients to react to things that are going on around them, you often don't really know what assets they have that you can use to help elevate them. And so that's kind of a high level of what that looks like without getting into like the nitty gritty block and tackle management of things. I will
Yep.
say that a lot of this is preparation and practice. If you want to be good at PR, um, you have to sit down and figure out what a win looks like in your conversations with the press, um, not as they're happening, but well before. And then you go back and you're like, okay, did I nail the stuff that I need to nail? Did I take this topic they want to talk about and spin it back into what's strategic for the firm or their portfolio clients? And so it's just practice and preparation, and that makes strategic communications and that makes impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about why is it important for VCs and even family offices, or maybe just the people broadly speaking operating in the finance spectrum, to be active about PR. The people who are managing capital and asset management, basically. Why is it important for them to have active PR and have that kind of visibility so that
Hmm?
the right kind of people know them?
Yeah. So, I mean, validation is really important. Um, we as humans, um, we do a lot of things. They're just human things, no matter how smart you are. You want to see someone else say, hey, I think I like what I'm seeing. I think that firm looks strategic. I think that firm is a good investor. But you want to see someone else validate that. We crave validation. I think in the digital age, again, we'll come back to, um, there's a lot of things out there that aren't validated, and we come back. Eventually it all comes apart. But if it, I think human beings, generally speaking, they look at something, they're like, I think something about it. And now I'm looking to either confirm or deny that thing that I think about that. And I think that's where PR really comes in. We have it come up all the time with our clients where they want positive coverage. They want to be out there. They want to be recognized as someone that the press calls to comment on trends and investing in trends in sectors. And when they're trying to hire people, those people go and look like, hey, is anybody talking to these guys? Or what are they talking about? Who are they? That's something we hear all the time. Is it's really important for hiring. It's also really important if you look at the game of venture capital. It's a brand game. Go to the Valley. Those are all brands, right? Oh, you got money from Andreessen. Oh, you got money from you know Coslow. Like, okay, then you must be something. And and being honest, I mean, most people, even the press, those kinds of forms of validation are often what people trade on. I mean, if you look at investing around FTX, that wasn't a due diligence mistake for a lot of people. That was a validation mistake. And and by the way, a lot of things weren't validated. There was just, there's a lot of PR and conversation, but there wasn't a lot of substance there. And so at some point, people weren't asking the right questions. They weren't, looking for the right validators before making decisions to get involved in those kinds of things. And we like to solve for those. We want, when you talk to the press, they're not here to tell you your story. They're not here to make you look great. They're here to ask tough questions, and you got to prepare for that. And usually they'll weed you out if you're not ready. And sometimes it doesn't go on in the times that we live in because the media are very time constrained and challenged. So we prep clients to be able to go in those environments, and I think we'll talk about some examples of that. I've got some examples we can kind of get into about different people we've worked with and how they've done that. But I think that's where we start.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you even talk about FTX, I think that was probably a classic case of there was amazing PR. Like they were everywhere on the news, on TV channels,
Mhm.
news channels, YouTube, everywhere they were there, right? And then suddenly it all blows up. So, is there a ethical concern to PR as well, that the clients that you're working with, are you actually
Uh,
promoting the right thing, right? Are the stories actually real, or is it something else being told to the media and something else? The story behind the scenes is different, right?
I will say that I've worked in almost every emerging tech sector, and the crypto one in particular is actually the least validated that I've ever experienced. So you can say that that was PR. I could go look at a lot of it and tell you it wasn't. And it's really a lack of like knowing what you're looking at versus what it actually is. Um, you know, if you look back, there's a lot of people, and there's some of them that have big names on big shingles hanging in the valley who didn't go through the press to pump that thing. And that's something we can come back to. There's a bit of a penchant in the venture community to be content creators, or as I like to call that, like self-fulfilling prophecy creators. Kind of speaking towards value states that they might have a vested interest in. That's not really PR. That's content marketing. And FTX. It's not that there weren't legit reporters, you know, going through a lot of everything and reporting. There was certainly that, but early on, that's probably not what it was. Early on, it was a wave of like social media and direct to audience content that kind of created a little bit of the value state of FTX. I personally, we work with clients that are in that space, and not one of them was bought into anything that was going on there because they just felt it was
Yep.
centralized. They didn't trust what they were seeing, and so like when we had that crypto washout, didn't touch us at all, and it's because the people that we were working with could see that like a lot of what was going on wasn't really validated. It was that hype cycle, which we can get into because you can really use a hype cycle to create value, um, for yourself. I think that's one of the things that we like to do is be really mindful of like where the conversations are going. And a lot of times these conversations happen once, like that FTX explosion. That's like a moment in time that will never be recreated. And yeah, so it's interesting, but I do think that you know the muscles for content marketing are really strong right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why we got back to the basics with PR, and also why I would say with family offices, who people are like, hey, these people don't want to talk to anybody forever. And when we opened up our channels into the family office world, we found really quickly that they needed like really core mindful public relations guidance. And don't get me wrong, most of them don't want it, but the ones who do don't have anybody to talk to. And so we kind of stepped into that void. And one of the things you first learn about family offices is that they have a lot of lawyers, and lawyers in PR are oil and water. And what it takes to be a good lawyer is in many times the complete opposite for what it takes to do good PR. And we can get into that a little bit, but family offices have inherently have a lot of lawyers, and they're very protectionist. But what we found is that the next generation of family offices are living in a little bit more of a public world. They're more social, they're more digital. And then you get, involved with that. And then some of the, direct investments and things that they're doing. And, they're the LPs funding the VCs who use the media pretty well. And they see that value creation and they're like, wait a minute, I'd like to do that for my things. And so that door opened a bit for us, and then we kind of walked through it. And there's not a lot of people who are doing it, but you learn very quickly that the core tenets of public relations and being mindful about everything that can be asked and how you're going to answer it is really applicable to them, because they're much more careful than maybe a startup will be, where a startup will be like, hey man, all awareness is good awareness, just get our name out there. And so we just kind of manage that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched upon that aspect because I know for a fact that family offices typically don't want to be too much out there.
Yeah.
But certainly there'd be some who want to, and I'm glad that you're helping out those. Uh, and
Well,
talking
well,
about
Prashant, really
the
quick, just
yeah.
to sorry to interrupt, but I don't even think it's a choice anymore. I think people are going to talk about them regardless, and it's we have a philosophy over here. It's like you're either going to tell your story, someone's going to do it for you, and I think there's a little bit more of a realization of that these days as you get into family offices, and particularly second and third gen members of those offices. Um, so that's what we found.
Yeah, got it. That's great. And talking about the key elements of a PR strategy. So when you're getting these clients, what all are the key elements of the PR strategy that you're building specifically catered to them?
Yeah, so I'll tell a story. It's probably better to tell about an example. Relevance Ventures out of Nashville, founded by Cameron Newton, and then now his brother Dean Newton, who are the nephews of Wayne Newton, the famous Las Vegas entertainer. They are Native American. They are the only non-tribe affiliated Native American VC. There might be one or two others, but they're like a full, like fully functioning VC. I think some of the ones are maybe not 100% fully a VC, but they have a really unique position in the world. And so when you start talking about PR, you got to look at your assets. What do you have? What do you want to elevate strategically? And so what we saw with them is we understood that the Native American thing is going to open up a lot of doors, because that's a unicorn. There's just not a lot of people out there who have that perspective in venture. Now, strategically, what you need to do is like, if that opens a door, you got to tell me why it matters, right? Because you're going to get conversations because it's a Native American VC. But when you have those conversations, will the people who are having them and reading them and hearing about them, will they walk away and understand why that actually has value? And so what we did is, because a lot of times what you'll run into with PR is that people will solve to the point of creating an opportunity, but they won't work all the way through the opportunity to say, okay, once we're there, how are we going to make sure that we're having a high value conversation, and or steering against the biases that a lot of times these conversations will have, because there's certain things that the humans are interested in learning about, and a lot of times those aren't strategic for the person having the conversation. So with them, we're like, we don't want to focus too much on you being a Native American VC. We want to focus on something that we actually helped create, which is called harmony investing. And so what is harmony investing? Well, it's what Native Americans come up with when they're in venture capital, because you know their heritage teaches them to be in harmony with their surroundings. And what they figured out is they were getting in health and wellness investing, some financial services investing, and a lot of those things that they were investing in were really about kind of people getting kind of balance in their life, whether that's health and wellness, psychological, or even financial. And we were like, that's very Native American. The whole world kind of puts you out of balance, and you're investing in all the technologies and things you can do that bring you back into balance. Wow, that's very Native American. That's very harmony investing. And so we help them build that whole narrative to explain who they are. So it wouldn't just be Native American VC, it would be Native American VC uniquely positioned to invest in and solve the challenges that people have right now, which then, guess what? Turns out great return on investments. And that's the kind of stuff that we do. We sit down and we like kind of account for, all the different things that could go into a conversation, from what gets the conversation to what makes it really interesting to what makes it high value. And if you're not kind of thinking those things through, you end up showing up and kind of serving the media's purpose. But I like to say that I like to look for win-win states. Like, I want to serve your purpose, media person, what you need, what's interesting to you. But at the same time, I want to get something for myself. I don't want them to be out of balance. I'm not going to show up and market myself, but I'm going to show up and make sure that we talk about your thing, and I tell you why my thing kind of might align with that. And that's those win-win states. And I think that's what you get in a relationship-oriented, public relations. It's in the word, right? Relations is in the word. And if you're having relations that are win-win for both parties, then you have more of them. If you show up and you just market to someone and they don't like you, you don't have another conversation with them. So that's kind of
Yep.
that's a little bit of like an example of like how we work when it comes to sorting out what a client has. A lot of it's just really understanding kind of spatially in the time frames, where do you fit in conversations, and then how do you take those opportunities and then reverse engineer them into stuff that's strategic for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one area where I've seen PR become very active is when there are important fundraisers that are happening. Maybe there's a new fund that closes for a VC,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or maybe for if it's a startup, then the VC investing in a startup. At that point, they want to create some hype around it. That okay, we invested in this company, right? So how do you tackle around these situations when these key events are happening? How do you market and get that press out in the best publication possible, and then get
Yeah.
that hype around it?
Yeah. So I mean, the key with all things with the best press is just understanding their wiring. So they're naturally wired to want to, be the first with information. So we like to use exclusive approaches. Um, there are a couple different ways you can do things. You can give someone an exclusive, let them roll the story out. You can embargo it to a bunch of people and let them roll out at a predetermined time. Or you can not do all those things and just leak your news and have it go everywhere, which is not unstructured and not very strategic. Um, we prefer the exclusive because we want to get that highest bar validation. We want to go to the toughest interview, the the person with the best brand, and get the best story we possibly can. We call them signature stories, because if you look at how just the media world works, is everything kind of waterfalls down from those in across digital media. So if you get a really great Wall Street Journal story that captures all the details of whatever the announcement is, why a fund matters or why an investment matters, why it's strategic, why it's like in high value. If you get that story, in like a TechCrunch or a Wall Street Journal, it tends to trickle its way down into the rest of the stuff that you're going to be pitching to some degree. So you get the highest bar validated and then go out there and you tell the best story possible and you manage that process as best you possibly can. That's just from a one-off news announcement perspective. Um, Other things is just sometimes it's about acting the part. If you see like 100 people show up and give you news and like 99 of them know what they're doing and it looks like it's supposed to and one of them doesn't, they don't people see that. They sense it. There's such a volume of stuff coming at people. They can tell when you don't know what you're doing. They can tell when it sounds like marketing. They can tell like when you're just like spinning, because they've seen it all. And so making sure that you look the part is another part of that engagement. You know, put your stuff on a reputable wire, not a cheapo wire. You know, make sure that you go out and like if you can talk about, if you actually if you're putting news out, one of the main things that people kind of overlook is like a story. If someone wants to write a story about a piece of news, they need two or three sources. So start by putting those actually in the announcement, right? Start to build the story. Basically, it's like Legos, right? If you know that there's a slot that's missing, bring a brick, put it in there, and get the right quotes in there, get the right third party validators, make sure that they talk about you in a way that isn't just like, yay, this is great. What does that mean? Tell me why it's great. Tell me why it's strategic, why it has high value, why it's aligned with your investing ethos. All those are moments for kind of validation of what you're doing. And if you don't kind of bring that chorus of voices in around your news, then you're leaving a lot of it on the table, because PR is all about getting people who aren't you to say what you want to have said about you that's strategic and high value. And if you don't bring those people to the table, the media has to either they're not going to do it, or because they don't have enough to actually write a story, or they're going to go out and find someone you don't know to fill the blanks in, and that's less strategic and lower value. So again, doing things the right way. Don't write a press release. It's just you talking. Bring in someone else. If a fund invests in you, have one of those funds quoted in your press release as you're a startup company. If you're a fund and you're putting something out, make sure that there's someone else kind of commenting alongside you in that news and corroborating and validating that news.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great approach there. I'm sure that's going to be helpful for our listeners. And now talking about the the metrics basically, because everything
Mm-hmm.
is evaluated based on some metrics if it's performing or not performing. So what are the KPIs for PR that people can use to evaluate its performance?
Well, I would first start with the word everything. I think that's a blessing and a curse for PR, because the reality is it's actually very, very hard to measure historically, and the way that it is historically been measured, quite frankly, has flaws, like deep flaws. Like, I can tell you the unique monthly visitors of where stories have appeared. I can give you this went on a wire to 180 million people. I can tell you, you've built X number of followers on social media. The reality is with PR, there's really no metrics that really it's a kind of a counterintuitive metric system. And what we like to say at Impact Partners, and one of the reasons why our name is Impact Partners, is we got a little tired of kind of trying to push what are essentially vanity metrics. Everybody wants you to put a number on something. Like, great, what does that number even mean? I can tell you, like, it went to this audience or that audience, or but there's a lot of PR that's kind of qualitative, not quantitative. Did 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 they capture what we wanted to talk about? Did they say it the way we want it to be said? Those are qualitative metrics that you can track for, but it's not something that you're running. Most people are not running NLP, um, language processing to like help measure the qualitative pull through of strategic communications. I'm all ears for someone who wants to do that, and there's probably a couple tracker platforms that do that, but most people don't. And so what we say at Impact Partners is, you know, we want you to feel like we're impacting your business, because the reality is, if you don't actually feel different having worked with us, if you don't actually like move through the world and it doesn't feel different to you, like something changed and like you're elevated in some way, then we're probably not doing our jobs. And there's no number I can put on a screen that's going to make you feel that way. You're going to feel that way, or you're not going to feel that way. It's a little bit like, not to boil it down, but it's like, taking someone and giving them a makeover. If you don't get a makeover and you don't walk out in the world and everyone's like, wow, you look great, or you catch people looking at you out of the corner of your eye, then you know what? Your PR might not be working, because that's how it feels when you have good PRs. Like, people, next thing you know, you're interesting. You're more interesting to more people, and you feel that. And it isn't always just a number on a screen. So I really kind of like to steer against the metric stuff, because I think the over metricing of PR is what turned it into a transaction and not a relationship. And I think it also muted its actual power, which is validation. And so I look at that a little differently. And it's really hard to that's a hard fight to fight, because we spent literally 2 decades trying to like say, hey, I want to measure it. And I'm like, well, I'd rather have you feel it.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And I love that approach because I'm also operating in the media space myself. I run a podcast, and I know for a fact that actually it's much more than just numbers. There is a big qualitative aspect that you cannot measure in numbers. So that's great.
Yeah.
And
Why
another
are
aspect,
people here? Why do they come to me? Why do you matter? I mean,
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
and I will say I've done some podcasting myself. Numbers do matter in that setting.
Yeah,
But if nobody's asking who those numbers are, then they're not having an honest conversation.
yeah,
because
true.
because especially for business and in the vertical you're working in with venture, like, who's tuning in matters quite a bit alongside of how many.
Yeah, yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree. There's always a qualitative aspect of the audience and even the guest that you're having on in terms of podcasting. But that's great. Awesome. So, another important aspect of PR is crisis management. And you
Mm.
just mentioned before this call, you were managing a crisis and you were in that situation. So, you're fresh into that mindset. So, let us know how do you deal with crisis?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that everyone needs to keep in mind is the core tenets of crisis communications, which have been developed well before we had any way to kind of amplify anything technologically, or outside of maybe TV and radio. Those core tenets have not changed. What you do in a crisis has not changed, and the reason it hasn't changed with technology is because at the end of the day, you're dealing with humans and their perceptions, right? And those haven't really changed. Like how you go about those things hasn't changed. So um, the tenet really is really you have to be kind of open, honest, and immediate or right away with your communications. And the key things are like very quickly is like you have to be involved in the story that's being told, because back to what we said earlier, if you're not going to tell your story, someone's going to tell it for you. Generally speaking, that's not a good place to be, having someone else tell your story for you. um, and that's where the honest part comes in. People are much more apt to forgive someone who did something wrong, who feels like they're being open and honest and contrite about what happened. When you obfuscate and you slow play and you misdirect people, that may provide what is perceived to be a near-term benefit, but the reality is all of it comes to light at some point, and people absolutely, it makes them insane when people don't own up to things or they misdirect them, and then you go from a mistake to being a marked person. And if you're not open and honest and urgent in those communications, you become someone who's hiding. And when you're hiding from anything, you're automatically guilty. So you don't even avoid anything. And then you become a mark. And people want to go after you and they want to out you. That is a human instinct that you have to understand in a crisis situation. People are actually incredibly forgiving to people who come out and say, you know what? Should have done better. My fault. We'll do better next time. People are like, they love because they want that. It's the people who run and hide and don't tell their story. That's where it gets ugly. Um, so that's kind of how you look at crisis communications. The other thing you have to be really mindful with it is understanding the state of the conversation. It's a very spatial, um, strategic effort in the sense where you can do things that makes the story continue. You can do things that makes the story shorter. And you have to always kind of gauge, if adding to the conversation causes it to come to a conclusion or if it causes it to drag on. And that's one of the things that's really, really important, because you have the first wave, which you, again, open and honest. But then you have to understand, if I keep talking, am I going to make it so this conversation sticks around longer? Or is the conversation going to continue regardless if I'm saying anything? And if it is, then you unfortunately have to be a part of it. You never want to have sit on the sidelines. No comment is just, you just sound guilty. Not participating, you'll be made to feel or positioned as guilty. And those are all things that you have to kind of keep in mind, is because you can do things that causes it to stretch out, if you're not careful. I will say, if we bring back the family offices, one of the interesting things about family offices and crises are just the involvement of lawyers. A lot of people, a lot of big businesses, a lot of family offices, there's a lot of lawyers around. We live here in the United States. It doesn't take long to find a lawyer, they're everywhere. I will tell you that the natural tenets of lawyers are actually really bad for PR, because their job is to limit exposure in a courtroom, right? But that's like not open, that's closed, that's not say anything. And that's uniquely bad for PR. And one of the things that I've noticed about family offices and a lot of larger organizations is they have to get into a mode where they're protecting themselves, understandably so, from potential legal ramifications, but it's uniquely bad for PR and public sentiment. Yeah, because it just comes off as obfuscating, and so that's the interesting little kind of stuff that we just like more people to have good PR representation, because if you just spend all your time with lawyers, you're going to have bad PR.
Yeah, totally agree. That's great perspective there. And now talking about the aspect of because PR is perceived in different ways from different people. So we'd love to learn from you, what are the common misconceptions that people have about PR?
All of them. All the conceptions are misconceptions. We were just joking about that the other day. How like none of our parents know what we do for a living, and my parents, I've been doing this for 25 years. They couldn't tell you, what I do, and so um, I think it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a dark art, if you will. Because partly because if you're doing your job really well, you shouldn't show up anywhere. Like you should be the hidden hand that's helping guide for a number of reasons. One, because you're kind of trying to get the most out of an opportunity for a client. Again, trying to get to that win-win state, and so sometimes the win-win state is more optic than substantive. So you kind of like don't want to be, overly, you know, like out in front of everyone and kind of seen. But also, it's like as a PR person, you shouldn't be seen. Like your client should be seen. Your client should be talking. If it becomes about you, then you're not doing your job. So it kind of creates this unique mix of things that keep it in a bit of a mysterious category. Um, One of the things that I think is a misperception of PR is just what's optically accessible that people think is PR, which would be publicity and a publicist. Well, what do you run into a publicist? Probably around a celebrity or some notable individual. They've got that person standing next to them, or a political setting. You have we'll call it a communications director, but it has that publicist vibe. And I think the idea that we're just these kind of spinsters who are just spinning all the time and needy for interaction and press, um, I think that's probably a misperception, especially the people who do it really well, who say, hey, I'm really trying to help you understand where the world's at, who you are, and what you have, and what's the best version of you given that scenario. And that's strategic communications. And I think a lot of people just think as PR is just simply about being in front of the press, getting more press. It's again, a lot of times it's all about getting in front of people, and people forget about the part about doing it well and doing it in a way that's strategic and high value. That's the thing. I think there's probably a misperception. And most people,
Yep.
they come to us because they want to get coverage, and that's great. We love it. It's important. It works. It's high value. um, but the good PR people will tell you, well, they want to get coverage that is strategic and high value and will impact your business. And it's a little different thing.
Yeah, totally agree. And now, coming on to my last main question before we go for the close, and this one is about what are the emerging trends that you're seeing within PR, and what does the future of PR look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future PR, frankly, is probably gets more technologically advanced, probably by AI. Um, right now we're already seeing, and we're using to some degree, tools like Profit, which is a Stagwell company. We work with Stagwell. We're intimate with some of their offerings, and that helps cut some of the time and customization. You still have to do. It's still relationship driven. If you're having a relationship, um, part of that's just having conversations that are bespoke. They're unique to that relationship. They're unique to their interests, and AI can fill a role strategically in that high relationship driven model, to help you be able to do more in a day that's high touch. So that's something that I think people will get better at. um, I worry a little bit that AI, when it really, when you give people the ability to do more in a shorter period of time, they tend to still lean more transactional. So like if I could get 100 pitches out, well, now I have AI and get 200 pitches out. That's not a personalization effort. That's a reach effort. Um, but I think we'll continue to see that. I think we'll continue to see um, more people, more large brands decide to kind of use their PR as more content marketing. So we're seeing this a little bit right now with A16Z and Mark Andreessen's Techno Optimist manifesto that he published. Um,
Right.
I think we could have some really interesting conversations about how the media views them from a PR perspective. And I think it's probably a good future forward conversation. Because again, when you're that big and important and influential as they are, you have every right to be a content marketer. But I will say that in that, I think we'll see more of that. And if we're talking about the future states, I will say that the the one thing about that is it doesn't always run through third parties who will sit there and say, "Here's 10 ways I'm going to question what you're going to say," and that's important because people are going to read it and do the same thing. And so I think we'll see more content marketing. I think we'll see AI get into adding like some speed and agility, which will probably be both reach and qualitative, custom conversation impacting. Um, and then, I personally, this is self fulfilling for me as impact partners. I think there's going to be a bunch of us who realize like what makes PR great is relationships and getting people to do things that you can't pay them to do for you that validate you. And I don't know that that's a technology conversation. I think that's a social psychology conversation. That's a likability conversation. That's a human conversation. And I'd like to think that, if we're experiencing this kind of value while a lot of firms have started around the time we started, they might have a platform or they might have a bespoke measurement tool or they might have, some sort of amplification tool. And it's not that those don't have value. Um, a lot of people set out to do that at the same time. I always think that when there's a lot of people doing that kind of stuff, there's probably instead of zigging, there's a zagging that gets back to more like the fundamentals and the more humanity of anything. Because I think the more we push into tech, I think the more people covet just real human interaction. So I'll go ahead and say that yes, we'll have this side of it's going to be tech, and that's what that innovation is going to look like. It's going to be more measurement, more amplification, more content, faster. But I also think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for people who actually know how to get people to like them and do things for them that are high value.
Absolutely, totally agree. That's great perspective there. Awesome, Jay. It was great talking to you, and I loved all the insights that you shared in the world of PR, especially focused more on VCs and startups. So, thank you for coming on. And to close this off, can you let us know where can people learn more about what you're doing at Impact Partners, and where can people follow you?
Absolutely. www.impactpartners.llc is our website. So pretty easy, you can access that. Um, I'm at Jay Kolbe on Twitter. My co-founders at Jonathan Zabak on Twitter. We're all over LinkedIn. If you just put in Impact Partners, we'll come up. But yeah, those are kind of a few ways that you can kind of find us.
Yeah, pretty awesome. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes below so that our listeners can get there easily. Thanks so much for coming on, Jay, and I wish you all the best.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun. Appreciate it, Prashant.
Thank you. Pleasure.